Hello, folks. Welcome. It is so fantastic to have you here. I am going to hit the mute all button so that we do not have random dogs, children, and spouses wandering through our backs. So, my co hosts, you will need to unmute yourselves. Welcome, everybody. We are so delightedly, incredibly happy to have you here at the Writer's Bridge. Yet again, we are just having a great time here. We've got a very special guest today who we are so excited to have you meet and have you hear what she has to say. I am going to go ahead and hit the mute all button. So if you're a co-host, you'll unmute yourself, and otherwise go ahead and keep it on mute because then we don't have to worry about random echoes and all kinds of fun stuff. Welcome, everybody. How do true stories get made into movies? And is your memoir ready for the screen? Our special guest today is award-winning screenwriter Michelle Cutler. She's going to dive into the art of adapting your real-life experiences into compelling narratives for film or TV. She's going to talk about how to work with a screenwriter and the different kinds of adaptations, including documentaries and fictionalized accounts. We're also going to share how to recognize a scam offer, what the heck a pitch deck is, and how to get your foot in the Hollywood door. But first, hey, Sharla, what's coming up with Craft Talks webinars?
Hello, everybody. Happy to see your faces. Welcome. So Craft Talks, we have a very busy week. It wasn't planned this way, but it just happened to be this way. We have a webinar that was rescheduled with Dinty Moore from last week to this week. It's happening tomorrow at 1 p.m. and it's on really trusting your reader. So if you're interested in that, again, that's at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And then Allison and Dinty are co-hosting a webinar on May 7th on using place time in detail to power your scenes. And then we have a seminar with Amy Collins that's happening on Saturday, May 3rd, about exactly what publishers want from authors and the key steps to landing a book deal good for all genres. So if you want to know more about that, please visit our new website, writingcraft.com, and I'll also pop that into the chat. Allison, what's coming up for you?
Well, I am so excited because I so rarely teach in the United States, and I will be teaching for Maine Media in July, which is an intense week-long workshop where we're all just going to make our writing so much better. And Dinty and I are super excited to be teaching for Craft Talks on May 7th. We are going to actually write scenes on screen in front of you to show you all how the process works. Now, I also want to just quickly show everyone, we have a brand new Craft Talks website. It is now at writingcraft.com. It looks a lot like this. And if you are looking for any of our events, we've got free stuff, we've got paid stuff, we've got Writer's Bridge. It's all going to be right here. This is also a great place to send your friends if you are hoping to get them into Craft Talks or if you are hoping to get them into the Writer's Bridge. And of course, we also have our YouTube, and you can go and find us on YouTube and subscribe, which we really appreciate. So feel free also, if you want to pass on Bridge to a friend, everyone is welcome, whether or not they're a writer, all genders, and it is totally cool to forward the email you get from us as well. Hey, Sharla, who is our special guest today?
I'm really excited to introduce Michelle. Michelle is an award-winning screenwriter, story consultant, and coach who specializes in adapting true stories for the screen. She optioned her first feature script to Miramax after completing her MFA in film from New York University and went on to write for Academy Award-winning producers and directors, as well as major and independent studios. She has, in addition to screenwriting, she studied advanced creative writing nonfiction at Cambridge and contributes essays to places that you will be familiar with, such as HuffPost, Business Insider, Under the Gum Tree, and many other literary magazines. She's working on a memoir about Gen X elder caregiving and lives in Spain with her partner, dog, and mother. So welcome, Michelle. So happy to have you here to talk about adapting true stories for the screen.
Thank you.
Welcome,
I'm excited to be here.
Now,
Hey.
Michelle, before we dive in, we want to ask all of our Craft Talks
Yeah.
writing attendees, would you please weigh in the chat? Where are you in your memoir to screenplay pipeline journey, with your scale being from someone once told me at a party I had a cool story and it should be a movie, to I'm kind of thinking maybe I'd like to finish this memoir and maybe there's some deeper potential, to my agent is already shopping around and I want to get more education on how this is all going to go. So scale of 1 to 5, 1 being just starting out, 5 being you are shopping that completed memoir. Where are you in your memoir to screenplay journey? And feel free to add some details if you feel like that in the chat. And as always, feel free to talk in the chat anytime you like. Michelle, so many of us have thought, wouldn't my story make a great movie? So many of us have been approached by someone at a party who's like, my story would make a great movie and you should write it and we'll split the profits, because everybody knows the idea is the easy part, right? So we all know it's not that simple. Give us an overview. How do true stories get made into movies?
Okay, so it's funny, I'm reading the chat. I love everyone's used the numerical system of 1 to 5. It's great. So what really happens for anything to get made into a movie, and it's similar to publishing, is you have to know who has the IP or the intellectual property. So you may have a great idea from your life that you think, oh, this could be a film, and people have said it over and over, and you should make that into a movie. You own the rights to that, so therefore you could start immediately working on it. At the same time, if you've written a memoir, it includes other figures, or you've written some piece of journalism, a reported essay, or a reported book of nonfiction, you have to get life rights. You have to get permission, basically. And this is a very unsexy answer, but it's like the most uncreative, unsexy answer, but it's absolutely essential that you have the legal right to take a true story and turn it into any kind of media or entertainment. So that's just the nuts and bolts answer to that. But when it comes to, once you have it, let's say you have the IP, you have the right to tell this story, no one's going to, take a lawsuit out on you or your production company or your director. Everything's a clear slate, clear path ahead. Then you would sign an agreement with a producer, director, talent, an option agreement. And again, this is not very sexy either, but all of these things want to be in place so that the creative process can begin, the collaborative part. If I'm working on an adaptation of a true story, and we are only able to really reflect, we only have the right to reflect a certain period of time in that person's life or a certain element of the event. And they say, but I don't want my children included. Like, this might be in the contract. Then, we have to creatively solve that so that these children aren't involved, or you never see a children in the scene. You may hear of children, right? So there are these sort of the legal part, the rights, all of this sounds, like I said, very uncreative. However, when you have these kinds of obstacles, that's when a lot of creative solutions come into play as well. And film is a visual medium, so many things that we maybe would take 2 chapters to describe, or 30,000 words to get us from A to B in a book. It could take 1.5 minutes on screen. It could take 30 seconds. And so that's where adaptation is happening, that the screenwriter is seeing your material in images. And I'm less interested in a lot of character description as I am interested in what the character does and how they change, right? So that's sort of that didn't totally answer. My other answer would be, in the same way when we're writing memoir or working on a book or a nonfiction book proposal, there's the question, why now? Why you? And you could say the same thing here, except for that, and you need to know that answer, but it shifts constantly because the time frame for something to actually get made or get optioned or get developed or get shopped is so long that the now of now will be very different 11 months from now. So hopefully the reason why now is something that is emblematic of a universal experience, emblematic of something that's accessible. and is important to more than just you and your family. One of my favorite Allison K. Williams quotes is when he said, "No one cares about your dead." And it's like this idea that, I mean, it's important to you, that these people that you're writing about, or your story, what happened to you is important. It's why you're writing or telling the story. But then again, and I see this in publishing, I know it in screen and film, it's a business, it's a market. So there has to be a reason that this story, which feels so personal to you, can expand, can be bigger than you.
Yeah, I have a question about that because I know there's a lot of trends and what kind of adaptations are getting made into movies and series. And right now there's a lot of true crime, for example, and I love true crime, to my children's chagrin and worry. But beyond genre, adaptation falls into different types. So what is the difference between like a narrative documentary, serialized or limited series? Also, maybe you could explain what like based on a true story means versus based on real events or inspired by. Like, what are those really saying?
Yeah, I mean, they're to start with, like narrative documentary, got really took off. I mean, narrative documentaries have always been interesting and compelling, but let's say it really, I think, took off like the early 2000s. There's a film called Capturing the Freedmans, and what was kind of spectacular about it was that this family had um, kind of documented their own life on VHS during a very tumultuous period, right? I'm not going to give you the plot away, but let's just say they had such a trove of material that you could actually walk into their story as a documentary. So as opposed to like a talking head, like Ken Burns type of documentary where you have, graphics and talking heads or experts, this was like an in-scene type of narrative documentary, which we see a lot now because, this another one would be I Am Zodiac. If you like true crime, it's a very good one to watch, which is just an insane. There's just so much material, and it's something to remember when a lot of times I'll talk to a client, or when I do consulting, they'll say, I don't know if it should be a documentary or a film or a series. A documentary, and I've spoken recently to documentary producers who have to put together these sizzle reels to even get interest. They need a lot of archival material. So if your story doesn't already have tapes, audio recordings, video recordings, visual materials, real live people, then you're dependent on a lot of sort of recreating of things, and that's not as interesting. So that can kind of wipe out the narrative documentary option if you don't have that material. Serial or limited series based on true stories. A good example, recently I was watching Apple Cider Vinegar. I don't know if you saw that. It's about, well, again, it's plot, but it was about a sort of a scam, a health scam, let's just say like a whole food health scam type of thing that took place. And it's very much based on that story and is not, and of course, everybody loves to Google afterwards, was that the real person or who did they do that? There's a lot of life after the documentary that happens in researching. And then you could say based on real events is something more based on like historical, cultural events that we know. So let's say Spotlight is based on true events or real events of this team of reporters who exposed this, crime happening in the Catholic Church. And then if you would, let's say inspired by is maybe something more like the movie Judy, where Renee Zellweger played Judy Garland in like this last, period of her life. That's based on what we know of Judy Garland's life at that time. But of course, it's a creative interpretation for that actor to play. So you see like the line is sort of blurring between documentary, which should be really researched, fact-based, vetted, all the way to inspired by, which is like really inspired.
And these different ways of being also require different amounts of involvement from the original author. Like if this is a documentary, and I know recently one of our attendees today, Lakshmi, she had a documentary made of her life as an Indian woman adopting two white children. It just premiered this week, I think, actually, Lakshmi. I hope that you will drop the link to the trailer in the chat for us. And that involved like her active participation through a whole lot of it. Whereas if it's more inspired by, it might be that you just sell them the idea, you just sell them the rights.
Mhm.
Now I have friends and clients whose books have been optioned for movies, and I still couldn't tell you how it happened because their agents handled it. But
Mhm.
authors can pitch their own work. So who do we pitch to? How does that work? I understand there's a thing called a pitch deck. What are we looking at here in terms of, hey, I wrote a book and my story is powerful, to someone in Hollywood would actually like to speak to me?
Mhm. Well, like you said, there's of course the very traditional route, which is, I was using Wild by Cheryl Strait as an example. You have an essay published, it becomes a memoir published. She herself sent the book to Reese Witherspoon, but of course it's a published book, so she has access to Reese Witherspoon before it actually hit the shelves, and Reese took it on to produce and obviously to star. That's like the perfect dream scenario. That doesn't always happen. And so, you can have, if your book is out now, if your book is coming out now, there is already, your agent is already, it should be already sending copies to agents of talent and or directors. If your book came out 5 years ago, it's a little bit different. You have to then maybe push a little bit more on the pitch. You work with as we talked about the pitch deck. It could be that something current in the news cycle makes something you wrote about 15 years ago current all of a sudden. And then that's a really good opportunity to then pitch that to a newspaper or to some kind of outlet, right? Because everybody's reading Apple News too. Reese Witherspoon reads Apple News, or at least her assistant does. So there are people, everyone is looking for stories. It's a great time to be, this is actually a great time because there are way less gatekeepers. There used to be, the ivory tower of gatekeepers, very hard to access and get into. And now you could be doing a podcast. You could have a play, like if you take Baby Reindeer, that was something happened to him. He wrote a play about it. It did well at the Fringe Festival. He optioned that to Netflix. There is no book. There's no source material. He adapted with Netflix in a writer's room his play into this, 6 or 7 episode series. Of course, it helps to have connections. It helps to know people. It helps to know someone who knows someone. But again, there are no guarantees. Again, it is like publishing. There are no guarantees. It takes a lot of luck. I mean, there's so many things involved. The stars have to align. You have to hope that the movie that just came out, that's just like yours, doesn't bomb. Like, it can be as fickle as that. Or it could be that the actor who's attached to your project gets canceled for some reason, and then your project ends up in someone else's back burner, or your studio head leaves and someone else comes in. There are just so many things, and I'm not saying this in any way to turn people off or to say, oh, it's not worth it, because it's like that with every art. The arts are like that. So I mean, it's a casino, it's a gamble. And the most important thing is to find a project that you feel you can live with for at least 1 to 5 years. Like, you have to love the subject matter. You have to love what you're learning while you're doing it, and the people you're working with too. Did that answer the question? Oh, the pitch deck. Ooh, sorry, I'm going to show you the pitch deck. Pitch decks are super important as proof of concept. Sometimes you might just have an article or an essay, or sometimes it's an oral storytelling situation, like on StoryCorps. It could be that you did an episode there. But the pitch deck it's very much like your narrative nonfiction book proposal, but it's visual. So I'm going to show you an example of something that I made for a project that I produced and won an award for. And then COVID happened right when we did that. And it's in Australia, so we couldn't travel. So we're just sort of behind a bit on, on that. And that can happen too, right? I mean, that can happen. So many projects got sort of pushed aside during that time. So this project, I'm going to tell you how I found this story, and this will help understand another way to understand
And
how.
Michelle, I'm going to ask a really dumb question to begin with.
Yeah.
Is a pitch deck a fancy slideshow that communicates your idea?
Yes.
More or
Yes.
less. Okay.
Yes.
Just so we kind of know where we're starting.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way. That is a great way to put it. It could also be, they can also live online now with obviously a passcode, and they can have gifts, and they can have proof of concept. You could shoot things, interview people, but the traditional pitch deck has the elements that I'm going to show you. But I found I was in between projects. I was going through my own materials. I looked back at something I wrote in grad school, like some scene I wrote where one of the characters couldn't talk and we didn't know why. And then it's revealed that his throat had been cut by his lover. And I thought, oh, maybe that's interesting. And I Googled, can you talk after your throat is cut? And the first result was this woman here, which is crazy, but her mother had cut her throat when she was 2 years old in like a psychotic episode, and she survived. And then the story is, a survival story. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, are you interested in doing something with this? She said she'd only been approached before by people who wanted to sensationalize the event. And so she was very hesitant about connecting with anybody to write a screenplay. And after we spoke for a while, I assured her I did not want to sensationalize it, and I wanted to tell the story, the family story. And so we signed a 3-year option agreement that had limitations on it, right? So I knew my parameters, and I had access to all of the crime scene forensics, and I had access to her unpublished memoir. I had access to her father and interviews. So, it's very similar to writing a memoir and narrative nonfiction. It's the same kind of research dive and access, right? So I have my cover page here. This is a photo, an image of the woman, the subject. And I had a friend of mine who's a book designer in Canada design the book. So I found source material in the forensics that I used as the source material for the pitch deck. It starts with a little bit of a pitch here. Susanna Birch's earliest memories. It gives it set up. The 4th is from the day that forever changed her life, the day her mother tried to kill her. So we know pretty immediately, what the stakes are in the story. On this next page, I take a quote directly from the thing, God saved you for a reason. And I give a very brief synopsis of the story. I then talk about what the film is going to do. This true story examines the months leading up, right? And I'm giving more information. These are real images from her home, from the place that happened. I write about the themes. This was originally a 30-minute radio documentary that I used as part of the adaptation. And I worked with a journalist who had covered it, the story originally. We decided to break it out into a limited series, even though I have a screenplay, the feature for it. We were pitching it as a limited series, broke it out into the episodes, what these episodes could be. Remember, this is just a pitch, so it doesn't mean this is how it's going to go, but I have to show something to prospective producers or financiers that we know where we're going, that this story has legs for episodes. Right? Because some stories don't have legs for episodes. Some stories are great as a movie, just as a feature. These are our main characters. And then I ask really straightforward questions. Why a limited series? Who would watch and who would benefit? And I answer these questions. What other series inspire us? At the time, Candy and Sharp Objects were cinematically and story-wise and character-wise our sources or our references. What makes our series different? I explain why it's like these and why it's not like these others. And the primary and secondary genres are true crime and mental health. And then Susanna is our heroine, our main character. And then there's a page for me and for the journalist consultant on the project. So, and then this. So that's sort of the basics, right? You have a log. I did not put log line. You can put log line. You can put synopsis. You can put main characters. You can do character pages for each. You can do a page. I mean, I could show you these. If we do a workshop, I can show you all of these different variations. But in the same way you do a narrative nonfiction book proposal where you give your comp titles, it's the exact same here. You would give 3 or 4 other titles, documentary and or feature, narrative. It could have been a fiction feature, it doesn't matter. But movies that tonally and subject matter wise and scale hit the same kind of marks as yours. So again, and the thing to think about with pitch decks and just in general, scale is like really important. Time frame and scale is just really important because how much of your story can you jam into an hour and 15 minutes, right? It may just be that you want to take that crystallizing moment and deep dive into it for 45 minutes. Like that can be your middle act, and 15 minutes is leading up, and then you have 45 and then 15. I mean, clearly I like doing it. It's fun. It's like a puzzle. But anyway, yeah, so that's sort of the long and short of pitch decks.
I have a question.
That's the short of pitch decks.
Yeah, it's a short of pitch decks, and it seems fascinating. And it does seem very similar to a nonfiction book proposal and the things that you have to consider. I have a question that goes partly from what Ellen mentioned in the chat, that a literary talent agent reached out to them a few weeks ago asking if they'd be open to pitching a memoir to production companies for potential film adaptation. And we've heard that one of the most common scams in publishing is when someone reaches out to an author and says, oh, we loved your book, we want to make a movie, but pay us, $10,000 to make a trailer or whatnot. And I've heard that it's almost always a scam when someone contacts the writer, unless your book was like a bestseller or big news or something. So how do we find legit screenwriters or producers? Do they find us? And what should we ask when we're considering working together?
Okay, I mean, that sort of breaks down into a few different things. My 2 red flags, like what I would say at all times, if someone contacts you about anything, I mean, you obviously do all the research on them. Just Google them. Look everywhere. Just Google everything about them. There's also the Internet Movie Database, IMDb, and you can always, put someone's name in there to see if they're being honest about their credits. But I feel like if someone hasn't asked you, do you have the rights to your book? Then, like, all the way back to the beginning, this idea of rights. Like, I reached out to a journalist who had written a book, and her article was in the New York Times, and I said, oh, I would love to adapt that book. And she said, oh, I hate to tell you, but I worked for Bloomberg at the time. I don't have the rights to the book. Now, I'm telling her honestly, and she's being honest with me about our intentions, right? I feel like if someone asks you and doesn't really want to know who your publisher is, like who owns the rights to this book, just because it's your memoir doesn't mean you have the right to make TV deals or adaptation deals. So that's just a level of professionalism I would look for, number 1. Number 2, no one can ever guarantee anything. So if anyone uses the word, we can get it in front of an A-list actor or in front of production companies or this and that. I mean, they just can or can't. They may or may not. So paying anybody for that kind of uncertainty, I would immediately question. You do, let's say to do a pitch deck, you do have to invest some money in a pitch deck, just like you have to invest a little bit in your project at, various times. But if you have something published, you always want a lawyer, you have an agent, there's that's when you're at that stage. But if you're just you, like the woman I reached out to in Australia, I just went to her direct and I was honest. And there was no scam because I didn't ask her to pay me anything. There was no money exchanged. We went into an option agreement together. We shared it. So she was an executive producer and I was an executive producer. We had equal stakes in the success of this collaboration. Now, if someone is coming to you and isn't showing you any deal memo, any kind of NDA or anything, if they're just asking you for money, if it were my mother, if they came to my mother, I'd say, Mom, that's spam. Basically, like I police my mom's inbox on that stuff, and I'm like, that's just spam, Mom.
Michelle, you
Yeah.
say you might want to invest in your pitch deck. How much does it cost to get somebody to review and help shape and perfect your existing pitch deck? And what kind of title does that person have? Like, do I Google person to help me with pitch deck, or what kind of person does that work? And how much is a legitimate amount to pay them if you don't have that expertise yourself?
Yeah, well, I do them. I do them because I'm usually helping. That's usually part of the deal that I'm working on with somebody. Like, I do the pitch deck content. Then you want a layout and designer, right? It can cost anywhere between, depending on what you're savvy at, what your son or daughter is great at Photoshop. I mean, you can, like everything in the arts, you gotta hustle and scramble, right? But let's say it could be $1,500, it could be $1,800, it could be $2,000. If a studio is paying, you ask for more money. If an individual is paying out of pocket, you see what's their budget. Like I
Okay,
prefer you say, what's your budget? And then someone
so
says, my budget's $800, and you work within that.
So, Michelle, one of the really, really common scams out there is people approach authors and they say, oh, we want to pitch your movie to some noted screenplay writers and some big deal producers, but you need to give us money first so we can make a pitch deck. What are the key things that let us know, yes, this is a fraud and a scam and they're going to keep milking me for money, or no, this person is actually legit and it is worth giving them a little bit of money to get started? Like, how can we tell? Because unfortunately, it's a
Yeah.
really common scam
Is
right now.
it? Yeah, I didn't realize that. I know that there are legitimate places like Roadmap Writers, the Blacklist, where you're paying a
And
fee to get
and
access.
and Michelle, when you
Mhm.
say the blacklist, do you mean the undeveloped scripts
Mhm.
blacklist put together by Hollywood actual people, as opposed to the we're going to evaluate your book if you pay us money and we promise
Yeah,
some movie people might someday look at it
I
blacklist,
just
which
wouldn't.
is, it's not a
Yeah,
scam. You're just not actually buying anything worthwhile.
yeah. I mean, I think we're all sort of walking around the same thing, as to say, like, obviously, no, don't do that. Just don't. I just don't.
So
It seems.
it
Yeah,
sounds like the difference is in who initiates the contact, because it
yeah,
sounds like if
yeah,
I reach out and I say, hey, Michelle, I think I want to sell my memoir.
yeah.
I think I've got something that could be a screenplay. I'd like to make a pitch deck. Will you help me? How much would that cost? That's different than somebody contacting me and saying, oh, hey, we'd like to pitch your memoir to the
Yeah.
stars.
Yeah, spot
And
on,
yet they
spot
don't
on.
have anything specific about why my memoir or which
Yeah,
stars.
spot on. No, that's exactly right. I would go exactly with that. That if you feel that you're at the point, or if you're curious, I mean, I would say, if you want to go to my website and go through my contact and show me, say, this has happened before. People in my writers group have shown me the emails they've gotten from these things, correct? And have said, what do you think? Should I do this? And I don't say no. I go through it. I look it up. I try to see, and I say, this is what I think. But no, I don't. I never feel right to say to people, do or don't do something. I can advise someone to say, I would not. I mean, it's like with anything. Do I need a new cell phone? No, I don't. So if they're coming at me for a new cell phone, yeah, no, I don't need it. I I'm I work in advertising also, so I feel like I kind of smell the cell very easily. I would say I know there are people, lots of people who do layout design and lots of people who do writing content. And you can really piece it together that way. And you can do your own image sourcing, from the materials you have. You want to be an active participant in whatever is happening. So anyone who comes to you and says, give me $5,000, it's the same. I see it with website designs. It's the same thing where it's like, hey, pay me $10,000 to do a Squarespace website for you. And I'm thinking, why would, what? But I have to imagine like spam, people must open it and do it, or else it wouldn't keep coming.
And I think Anna has a great note in the chat here where she says, ask them questions. Ask why
Mhm.
me? Why
Exactly.
now? And if they
Exactly.
cannot answer those questions, chances are much greater that they're a scam. So
Yeah.
once we've navigated the shark-filled waters of scamdom and we get to a legit deal, we have a great question from Rebecca. She turned her memoir into a middle grade novel, sold it to Farrar Straus Giroux. It actually comes out next year in the spring, and she's hoping the movie rights will sell. Can she ask to write the screenplay herself if it does? And if so, is that not a great idea? Is that a great idea? Say we got a deal and we're actually in the process of making the movie. How does this
Yeah.
adaptation process work? How much does the writer get to be a part of it?
Well, I'm going to say if you're not a screenwriter already, they will. I mean, again, there's always an example of the other, but most likely, no, you're not going to be writing your script. They're going to try and get a screenwriter, either with credits and or a screenwriter. If they're going to talent or a director, they often have their own screenwriter. If you were a screenwriter already, if you had 3 or 4 screenplays to show them on spec, it's like, look, I know what I'm doing. I know how to write a screenplay. That's possible. That's very possible. I mean, that can definitely happen. And or you can be paired with a screenwriter, depending on how personal the material is. So, going back to Wild, Nick Hornby collaborated with Cheryl Strayed on the screenplay. Currently, Lydia Yukinovich's The Chronology of Water is being filmed by Chris. I think they already finished filming by Kristen Stewart, and Lydia's husband co-wrote the adaptation with Kristen Stewart. Obviously, Lydia Yuknovich was involved in that. So yes, the writer of the original can definitely be involved, but they also can be completely 100% not. Like, so not that they don't even know what's happening until the movie comes out. It depends on the deal. It depends on your agent. Um, you know, it's a hard one to answer definitive. I mean, to be honest, all of these questions are hard to answer definitively because there's always an example of it working in one way or the other. But I can't stress enough the importance of having representation, and it doesn't have to be a big super agent or anything. There are lots of entertainment lawyers. I got an entertainment lawyer through Women in Film and New York Women in Film and Television, which is a guild for women writers, and I got a great entertainment lawyer for a super reduced price because I'm part of this, organization. So you have to do the work. I think if you don't have the agent and you don't have that person, if you're on your own, you have to act like your agent. You have to act like your lawyer. You have to really vet everything, and definitely just don't give any, like as a rule, just don't give any money to anyone. Ultimately, you should get paid, right? Even if it's a dollar, even if it's a symbolic dollar, you should get paid. And if you're not getting paid a symbolic dollar, you're getting back end percentage deals, or you're getting an executive producer credit, or something that has value. Um, the thing about screenwriting and screenwriting is interesting because as a screenwriter, there are a lot of steps, right? So I get paid to write a narrative treatment. And then that gets approved and we have notes, we go back and forth. Then I get paid to write a first draft. And I'm breaking it down very basic, but I write a first draft, that gets notes, goes around for notes, comes back. I have to do a second version, or a polish. It depends, how far along we are. And I get paid in steps.
Mm.
Um, it's not as lucrative or glamorous as it sounds, as it sounds out in the world. It's really not. It's definitely like a journeyman job. It's a tradesperson's job. It's a union type job, really. So you're working for people who are really fickle, and things change, and the craziest notes come back, and you're like, what? Why would I ever, what? So there's so many hands involved along the way. And again, we're talking about a product that has to go to market and be bought
Right.
by a studio or a streamer,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah.
I like how Rose says getting paid to do drafts sounds like a fabulous thing. I mean, many of us do not see a dime for anything we write. So that actually
No,
sounds appealing. But you're right,
it
it's a
is.
collaborative process. It's not so much a lonely do it by yourself and then never hear from anybody about it, which is most of our lives, I think, when it
Yeah,
comes to
that's true.
yeah.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, okay. I know you touched on this a little bit, but like how do I get in the door and make connections in the industry? How do I get discovered? Do I have to find an agent first? Or I mean, what is your suggestions for like entirely a newbie like myself?
Well, we're sort of beyond the time where you actually had to be physically in Los Angeles or Hollywood. And mind you, let's remember that we're only just talking about LA and Hollywood, but there are excellent films being made like all over the place, all over the world. So if your story is set in Ireland, the Irish Film Board is incredible, the Film Council. It doesn't have to, you're not like, don't have to go knock on doors like The Player or something, like a Robert Altman movie or something. There there are festivals everywhere. I mean, I think every single city and town has a film festival at this point, and everyone is attended by someone, at least 3 or 4 people who are connected in some way to the industry at large. And all of them are looking for material at some point. I mean, everybody's looking for a story. So instead of thinking I have to get an agent, I have to be in LA, I have to take meetings. Everybody loves meetings. It doesn't mean anything gets done. Like meetings are really to fill calendars. It does not mean that anything comes. They're fun, but it doesn't mean anything comes to the meeting. I moved to Spain. I'll give you an example. I moved to Spain about 10 or so years ago. I'm a Los Angeles-based screenwriter, but I actually physically live in Spain. That has not killed me at all. I now am able to work out of the UK, like with people in the UK, people in Europe, people in Australia. So to say that LA is the nexus is not real anymore. There are just so many places, festivals, screenwriting competitions or pitch competitions. You can do, there's the trade magazines where you can actually and pay attention to credits and posters, like who's making the movies that you really like who's the name, the third or fourth name down, not Mark Wahlberg, like 3 or 4 names down where you're like, who's that person? They're on A20, like start to pay attention to production companies, pay attention, go see the movies you love, like get into the movies you love and look at their credits. The same way we say with books, who's the author thanking in their book? Oh, maybe that's a good agent to check out. It's really it's the exact same thing. And you can publish an essay. Like I said, people are always looking in their news feeds. What's a good story? What's a good story? Get things published. Write your blog.
And Michelle, what about other non-traditional routes of getting published? Like you seem to be segueing really beautiful into Anna's question. Other routes and other modalities. What if your story is better suited for a podcast, or maybe it begins as a podcast? Anna heard about a memoir deal offered to a woman sharing true stories on TikTok. I think that might have been Who Did Risa Tisa Marry? Yes, she thinks waiting around for an agent or a publisher in a traditional route isn't always necessary. What about these non-traditional routes that people get connected to getting their story out into the world?
Well, I think on that side, what you're saying, getting your story out into the world, I would take any route at that point, non-traditional route. But when you're taking that story to a movie, that route becomes more traditional. And again, that's because of the legalities. It's a practical thing. It's logistics. And also because it is broken down into departments. You know, there are a lot of roles to be played before a movie gets made, and money to be collected, right, and promised on. So, but yeah, podcasts are great, serialized podcasts, or even a one-off like the one I found in The Guardian, you know, Australia. TikTok. Now, I was at a screenwriting at a like a Writers Guild thing a handful of years ago in LA, and they had screenwriters and then they had bloggers and people who had written like articles for GQ, and they were talking about agents and people who are optioning and or signing these writers, like bloggers and GQ writers. And I thought, and I asked the question, I was like, but how do they write the screenplay? Like, just because you wrote a blog doesn't mean you know how to write the screenplay, right? So there is a huge leap. The screenwriting is a whole craft unto itself. It's not just software, you know. It's not. I'm going to tell you, I experimented to see if AI can write a script, right? I wanted to see. I prompted it. I entered information and I prompted it, and it wrote something, but it was not the script. I mean, it was not what it should be. It is not. It would just never be used, although I do think it is being used, but I would never use it. So non-traditional is a great way to go. Like someone is, you know, sitting in a spa or hiking somewhere and they get an alert on their phone and they see this little story that you wrote and it's on, you know, Noah Michelson gave it the thumbs up, and you're like out there and it's like, oh, wow, that sounds like an amazing story. Who wrote that? Scroll, scroll, scroll. Who wrote that? Oh, and of course, yeah, like, and we always put all of our contact information in these things. I mean, that's why you put the contact information, which means have a really good website. Have a good website.
Yeah. Sounds very similar to the advice people get about getting a book deal. It's like do the work and and hopefully you'll find your audience by doing the work and continuing to put your stuff out there.
Exactly.
We have a question about screenwriting contests, and you need to talk a little bit um, about film festivals and such. But are screenwriting contests, are they legit?
There are ones that are very legit, and usually they've been around for like 5 to 7+ years. And you can look at this on Coverfly. Coverfly is actually really good for that. I think Film Freeway. I haven't used Film Freeway in a long time, but Coverfly is nice. You can, and again, it's sort of like submittable. It's the same kind of thing where you can do searches, and by genre, you can do searches by location, by subgenres, what's coming up next. But I wouldn't, and it's the same thing like submitting to journals, you know, how much are you going to spend at a certain point? Like $20 for a competition in a literary journal and $50 for a screenwriting competition. Like it gets expensive. So you really have to have something, you know, that you feel really, really strong about. And usually, one I like to do, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to like to do Sundance, because for Sundance, you just have to, well, they may have changed it, but you'd submit the first 5 pages plus basically the contents of what would be a pitch deck. And there was something about doing that got formalized my project, right? And about 4 or 5 times I got into the next round of that, which meant I then had to write the screenplay in like 15 days. I don't recommend doing that. That's not, I can do it. I've made myself crazy. I don't recommend doing that, but it is something nice about having these deadlines. Like I just sent a script to the Baltimore Film Office because they have a competition. I think it's free, you know, like look for locations are great. You know, like I said, if it's Ireland, if it's New Orleans, if it's West Virginia, check out their local film office, check out their competitions, because they'll want you to write a script for locations in their town or in their city, you know. So, but again, this is for the screenwriter. Like you have to be at writing the screenplay basically, and or working with the screenwriter too. Like I'm
And we
coaching
have a
someone right
couple of
now.
we have a couple of good questions too about any advice on how to learn the basics of screenwriting so that we can recognize the elements, do more thoroughly informed research. Um, Sharla recommended the book Save the Cat for like a really good review. Story by Robert McKee. It's a classic. It's older, but it's still pretty true about it. I want to tell all of you too, many of you know me as a person who does a lot of teaching on dramatic structure, and I'm also pretty strong on dialogue. And I learned all of that from getting my MFA in playwriting. So I have a creative writing MFA, but my focus was playwriting. And what I absolutely love about playwriting, and I think this is also to some extent true about screenwriting, although it happens in the rehearsal room, which is if you have a scene that doesn't make sense or a character who is unmotivated, the actor will stop reading and look at you from the stage or across the table and say, excuse me, why am I here? What does my character want in this scene? I'm just not getting her. And you have 24 hours or less to rewrite that and fix it, or the same actor will stop in the same place the next time you run it in rehearsal. And it is priceless to be able to hear your words aloud, hear them read by somebody, and it is absolutely worth learning the basics of screenwriting and the basics of playwriting, even if you never want to write a screenplay, because it also helps you turn reflection into action. And Michelle wrote a great blog for Brevity this week where we talked about turning reflection into action and how just thinking of your work cinematically, thinking of scenes in terms of images, can really help make your memoir more active on the page and your fiction more active on the page. Michelle, where else do you recommend that people should go learn?
Well, I believe, really believe in watching movies and reading scripts. That you can, all these books can tell you something, and you do need to understand how screenwriting works on the page. Like it is a technical sort of document in that way, although I like to think of it as like literary art because you are writing on the page. It's a visual medium on the page, right? But and there are things you need to know about all caps and indentations and things, but that's not what screenwriting is. I mean, screenwriting is storytelling, cinematic storytelling. And I say we did another brevity blog where I was talking about screenplay structure. Find 2 or 3 movies. It's like your favorite movie that you've watched 1,000 times and get the script for it and start looking at the shooting script, not the transcript, not what, someone writing it, the actual shooting script, which you can Google as a PDF, you can find it usually online and start studying. Like, look at what happens at what's the opening scene and how is it written? What happens in the first 5 minutes? When is your main character? See what happens on page 30 in the movie and on the script. Like, there are dramatic indicators in the script that are read by many people, actors, cinematographer, lighting design, wardrobe, prop people, sound people, editors. The editor reads the script before you shoot it. The person who writes all the notes in the script. So it's like a living document, working document that everybody's holding. So it's more than just, I think Save the Cat's great. It's actually fun, and it has really nice simulators for structure. You can like kind of do these structure simulators. But again, that's kind of on the nerdy side, and it doesn't get you to the heart of what makes a great film on screen, in a screenplay, I think. So I just say always watch, read, the same way, and then maybe take a seminar or go to a live reading. But I wouldn't invest too much in books about screenwriting. Although, like Louis Malle or Alfred Hitchcock or Truffaut, I mean, there are some great books about filmmaking and directing and understanding how those stories, came to life. It's important that's a good point I've just made. It's important to understand actually what happens to this piece of paper, that it becomes a production. It becomes a living, breathing set where people are running around doing crazy things to get one shot, and that one shot tells you everything about your character, that character.
I love that idea.
And I think that's both the most wonderful thing and the most difficult thing about seeing your true story turned into, adapted, made into a documentary and inspired by, based on, because it really is about collaboration, and authors lose a great deal of control. So, maybe your story was all about this one thing, but there's a really great actor who wants to play a minor character, and they're going to jack up that person's part as much as they can because that's part of the movie business. In just a moment,
I've had to do that before, actually. I've had to rewrite a character that wasn't important at all just because Post Malone was going to come on to do it, and that's how the movie would get greenlit. I mean, it's crazy. But someone wrote a great question, how to pare down 243-page memoir and 120-page script. And I would say, I would love to talk to that. There's so many questions that get asked before you even get there. Like, there isn't one technical, we're not going to come out with knives and start paring things down. There has to be a logic, like an emotional logic to why you're following this track of the story, and you're just dropping all these other characters and you're dropping all of these other scenes. Another question is budget. Like, if your film is a sweeping, or your memoir story is a sweeping narrative of the 18th century, it wouldn't be your memoir, but let's say it's historical nonfiction. That's a really expensive movie to make. But if it's a road trip movie, if it's you cleaning houses as you're trying to make a living to take care of your kid, that's a smaller movie, a smaller budget, right? So we're looking at scale. We're looking at, is it a period piece? Is it something that needs special set dressing? Is it something that requires 1,000 extras because it takes place, at Altamont or something? Like, there's no one answer. And if anyone tells you there's one answer, if anyone tells you there's a book that's going to tell you how to do it, or a program, it's just not, I hate saying it's not true, but it's hardly true. How about that? It's hardly true.
We are near the very end of our time, and we always like to end with our top tips for simple actions that our audience can do today to use this information to inform their writing, to make their writing better, more powerful, stronger. Sharla, before we share our top tips, I want to remind everybody that tomorrow we have the rescheduled Dinty W. Moore webinar on treating the reader like they're smart. It's going to be a great class. Dinty is a great teacher. He's one of my favorite teachers. I learned a lot of what I know about writing from him. And I also hope I will see some of you in Maine this summer at Maine Media. Sharla, what is your top tip?
Well, I was thinking about this subject when I was talking to Michelle about Writer's Bridge, and specifically because I found that trying out different storytelling forms, different containers, if you will, can teach me a lot about the craft of writing and also about plot. And that's part of what draws me to the idea of screenwriting. And I know that you have to let go of some of the rules of traditional story structure. You get to step outside the usual confines, and you can let the story guide you instead of the other way around. And again, you can learn a lot about story structure. So my tip is more of a question, I guess, for all of you that are in attendance right now. Are you curious to learn more about the nuts and bolts about how to adapt your true story to the screen? For example, multiple ways to pitch your story. Or if you would be interested in Craft Talks doing a webinar on that with Michelle that explores it more, please give a yes or a thumbs up in the chat. And I'd love to know if this is something we should offer.
Okay.
Awesome. Well,
thanks everybody. I can see the chat.
Michelle,
yes.
Michelle, what is your top tip for today?
Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking about this. This is a tip sort of prompt. Okay. So I like to use a baby reindeer example when I do this course, or when I do this workshop, because there's this one character in it named Martha, who is his stalker, right? And in real life, it's a real person. And as much as they said, no, this is not that real person, I mean, they did everything they could to not out who the person was, but she became known. And then she sued Netflix and Richard Gadd. Okay. So I always like to ask people when we're talking about adapting a memoir or true story, like, who is your Martha? Who is potential Martha in your story? The person who might just come back and bite you in the ass, like for all the things you've done to get your story where it is, all the hoops you jumped through. And then there's that person who comes back and says, no, you can't tell that story, or you're telling that story wrong. Now, obviously, it didn't hurt the series that she was creating that buzz. Who knows if they paid her? I mean, there are a lot of things that happen in marketing, but I always like to ask, even in memoir, essay writing, anything that's going to go public, who is your Martha?
Love that. Love that. Who should we be making sure we tell their story fairly? Love
Or cut them out, or fictionalize them.
And I want to leave you guys with my top tip, which is it is absolutely worth your time to learn a little bit about screenwriting, about playwriting by reading screenplays, by reading plays, maybe by taking a class in it, just so that you can get a sense for how does dialogue work when dialogue is all you have? How do images work when the images tell the story as much as the dialogue and the actions do? And take this into your memoir and look at what is a powerful image that you can share in a sentence or two on the page that creates mood, that creates setting, that creates tone. You guys are amazing. We always love having the community on board. Please remember our replay will show up on our YouTube channel. Please go subscribe. We would love to see you there as well. We are so glad that you are heading out into the world with us as part of the Writer's Bridge. Happy writing, everybody. See you next month.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Feel free to unmute yourselves for a happy goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Hi.
This is wonderful.
Hi,
Hi,
it's
Allison.
Wonderful.
Yay.